So again, thank you for Randy and all those who helped with testing. That was great. And then came back a year later, got my general, and joined the club. I've got a picture there from 2019 7QP. That was one of my first times really being part of the club event and making a bunch of contacts with that. And I had my first run in the morning. So really appreciated that back in the day with Jim Hill sitting with me. Summits on the Air started again in November. So again, been on quite a few summits, 100 unique ones in the Northwest, mostly in Washington, but also in Oregon. And then since I was up on summits and I'm like, I'm already in a park, probably check that out. And so I looked at parks, and then I said, no, that looks too complicated. And so I waited a few more months and then looked at it again. And the reason I did that was because of the rules I wanted to make sure I understood. And then the logging, you had to do some ATIF file format and something I wasn't familiar with, and email a file to somebody in a specific name format and everything. And so I finally figured it out and finally started in 1219. So it wasn't too bad. There's been a lot of improvements with logging, and it's a whole lot easier now. So I want to walk through that today. Winter Field Day 23, I went to Camino Island State Park. So that's a picture just sitting there on the beach and playing radio there. That was a fun 2-day, and stopped by to see the Stanwood Club as well. Again, YouTube, I started sharing on YouTube primarily to give information about summits, because there's a lot of summits I was going to where there was no information. And so I wanted to share that. And so a lot of learning is creating videos and going through that. If you are interested in Summits on the Air, I've got some videos there about starting and resources, and finally joined a few socials there. So I've got my social information if you want to follow. All right, what is POTA? 2016, I'm sure there's folks in this room, I think I've probably heard John talk about it, other folks that were part of the National Parks on the Air program. It was an official sponsored ARRL event. And due to funding and other things, it was only a 1-year program. And so there was a group of folks who sat around and said, we've got to keep this going. What can we do? And so they were a bunch of volunteers, and they started basically Parks on the Air at that point. And what they wanted to do is make it more accessible. So National Parks in the Air was national parks. And what they did is they went through a lot of the states and looked at state parks, added a lot of state parks. They also added reserves, trails, and other things. And so there's a lot of other opportunities for people to activate a park. It's also now international. I think the website said around 130 different entities. And so a lot of other organizations out there. The goal, if you read things, is to have fun and really keep it simple. So the rules are simpler than Summits on the Air in a few aspects. And so I'll go over that, but it is really all about getting outside and having fun. Some terms really quickly. Activator, that's the person in a park trying to make contacts. And then hunter is the one who makes contact with that person in the park. If you hear somebody calling CQ POTA and you respond, you are a hunter. And thank you for doing that. What you'll find out is if you log into and create an account at Parks on the Air, you'll find out that you have records and people that have put you in the system, because the activators are the one that do logs and submit logs for Parks in the Air. So hunters don't do that. So if you do log in and create an account after today, you might find out that you've already had some chases or hunter. Why POTA? Well, one of the things for me is limits at the residence. And so I have high noise. I know I need to go through my house and find out all the things that are causing it. But you can tell the picture on the left is about an S9 noise level at 14,285, it looks like. And the right picture is at Fort EB on the same frequency. And you can see that there is no noise. I think, John, maybe you were the first one to activate that, if I remember. So antenna space is another. I've got an attic dipole, again, not the best, a pretty small yard. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to do a park. Exploring great new places, or if you're already camping. If you're going to camp with family, you're at a state park, bring your radio, make some contacts, casually, whatever. Summits on the Air and Parks in the Air have gotten me to all kinds of great spaces and parks in our state that I would have never gone to. There's Beacon Rock State Park in southern Washington along the coast, this cool little rock tower type thing you climb up to. Steamboat Rock in eastern Washington. There's all these parks that you go to that I would have never gone to them if it had not been for Parks in the Air. Learning. When you go to spots, you set up your station in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of learning there. And about how to aim your antenna, or can you aim your antenna, where to set it up, different interference things, gaining your confidence and calling CQ, having people respond to you, because when you say CQ POTA, this is Whiskey Alpha 7, Juliet, November, Juliet, calling CQ Parks on the Air. And if people all of a sudden start coming back to you, you've got to get that practice. Okay, how do I manage a pileup and how do I work through that? There's learning in that. We see some of that at field day and other things, but when you're at a park, that's a great thing. It's a fun way to gain experience. I was hesitant to put this. I see it as something you can add on to summits on the air if you're already on a summit. And so if you're in a park and you're on a summit, I definitely recommend that you do Parks on the Air. It's helped me get contacts when I was struggling to get contacts. I'll put out a spot for summits on the air, and then I'll let people know I'm in a park, and I'll get contacts doing it that way. Parks on the Air is not SOTA. I don't have to always go on a hike up to a mountain. I can be at a beach, or I can take it easy. I can sit at a bench. And so there's pros and cons of both. A great community. When I first started in 2019, there was not a lot of folks in Washington that I saw that were doing it. Now this year, I've gone out and activated, and I've run into somebody almost at every other park that's also in the park doing Parks on the Air. So it's been fun to meet people. What does an activation look like? I'll show you real quick, but you got to find your, that is funny. Choose a summit. See, my brain is thinking, choose a park. That's embarrassing. I went through this so many times. That's funny. Pack your equipment. And I could have included a picture of my last park attempt where I'd set up my antenna and realized I left my power cable at home. And so that's happened a couple times. So remember to bring all your cables and your adapters and think through that. I'm not always good at this, but you can post an alert before you go to the park and let people know you're going to be there. And then if you bring your phone or something like that and let people know when you're at the park, the frequency you're on, then that'll help you make contacts. I'll sometimes drive around the park. I'll figure out where I want to put up my antenna and where I want to sit and hang out for a couple hours. And so set up your station. I've got kind of how I would do it. I've got a few antennas up here today, but I've got a mast leaning up against the railing or the balcony there, and a wire coming down onto the floor. So that's one way, and I'll show you different ways that I'll throw antennas up or get wires up in the way, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be really, really simple. Make at least 10 contacts to activate the park. And if you don't make 10, you still had an attempt, and I will say sometimes it's been really hard to make 10 contacts. I sat over in North Cascades Highway for about 5 or 6 hours and finally got my 10th on FT8 because that was the only way I was going to get anything. So sometimes it goes really quick. Sometimes it takes a while. And then you got to upload your log to the POTA website. All right, so let's go to the website, and we got parksontheair.com. Along the top bar there's a map of entities. And so we'll go there and look at that in a little bit. There's different other things, but let's look at the help and getting started. Really the first thing, if you're interested, and even if you're a hunter, if you're not really interested in getting out to activate a park, definitely encourage you to log in. There's a sign up for POTA, and there's also a rules, frequently asked questions, and guides, really easily accessible there. There's different ways to sign in, methods there, and then also you can just create an email and a password. When you get into the website and you log in, the first thing that's going to come up is the spots information. And on the very top side, there's a Parks on the Air menu button. And so you click on that, and there's different options that you can see up there of adding a spot, adding an activation, and all these different menus. So I'm going to really quickly go through that so you can feel confident when you go to the website. This is how it works. So on the spot page, it'll just keep scrolling, and constantly what this is telling you is who's at what park, what frequency they're on. So if you're trying to look for people to chase or hunt, you can just log in, or you can look at the website and bring up, hey, this person's at this park, they're in Florida, They're on CW, whatever, and you can go through that. When I'm at a park, I'll sometimes have my phone up with this website and spots, and then I'll filter it for the band I'm on or their mode I'm on, because there are a lot of feeds that kind of come through pretty quick. So that's one way if I want to find other people at parks to make contacts with. When I'm at a park, I'll have my cell phone with me, and it's pretty easy to let people know you're at the park. So you press spot or add spot, put your call sign, put your frequency. It's kind of funny. You don't do the decimal on parks on the air. I'm used to doing the decimal, I think, on summits on the air for the frequency that you're on, and then your park reference. And I was kind of laughing. I'm putting salt in my wound of not being able to activate a park, but Saltwater State Park was where I left my power supply and have not activated yet. Anyway, that was that park that's listed there. In the comment field, calling now is not the best comment, but I'll by default for some reason put that. It's good to put your mode. So if I'm doing FT8, you'll put FT8 in the field or CW, and that way to let people know what mode you're on. If I'm at another park or doing a multiple park activation, I'll let people know, hey, I'm also at these other parks. Or if I'm on a summit, I will let people know I'm also on a SOTA summit, and I'll put that in the field. Or if I'm putting out alert through summits on the air, I'll also say I'm also at this park. So those are options for letting folks know where you are. All right, one of the important things is finding where are the parks. And so we got a circle that comes up. When you click on the map, there's all these little circles there, and those are the parks that you can activate. And the yellow circles are great when it's a smaller park. It gives you a good location. We have a lot of national forests and trails that those aren't going to be a really good reference for location, but this is a good spot to at least get you near focused in. And I clicked on Wallace Falls State Park, again, one that I actually still need to activate. And so I click that yellow, it brings up that little box. And then if you click on more information, you'll see for Wallace State Park, you'll see the latitude and longitude or location. They've got information about the early shift and late shift. So that's some specific awards, a website for the park, who activated it first, etc. And then the left, who are the park leaders? John, N7AME got 30. You're the second leading there for that park. So there's information there about the park, and that's one place to start. There's also a tab on the park list. I don't look at this as much anymore, but we've got over 200 parks in our state of Washington. And so it'll list the park, it'll list the location, how many times it's been activated, how many times it's been attempted, how many QSOs, how many times I've activated, or how many times I've hunted. So another source of information. Official events, there are different events officially through Parks on the Air. One is the first week of the year. Just that whole week, if you either activate a park or hunt someone in a park, you'll get a certificate and you'll get an award for that. There's also support your parks events. So each quarter throughout the year, there'll be support your parks. And then there's a plaque event, which is usually in the summer one. So I haven't focused on that or done that one as much. I think besides official events, I'll say it's fun to look at your contest calendar and see what's going on. So for me, it's been fun for Winter Field Day or a DX International contest to find a spot in the park, get an antenna, and make contacts from that as well. Now, make sure you follow the rules of the contest, because if you can't spot, make sure you don't spot. Part of what makes Parks in the Air fun is the different award schemes and all the different ways you can track your progress. I brought this up to show some of the high-level awards, so how many people you've chased, how many activations you've done, how many park-to-park contacts, if you've been part of those events. A rover warthog is doing 5 activations within a day, and it'll list some high-level stats. It's kind of fun because you can also look up other people if they're in the database, and so in the very top, you can do a search either for a call sign or a park, and just see where other folks are, how they're doing as well. Sticking with the awards, this is again, just a list of the awards that were shown in that first page. And then I like to go here because there's little menus and I can see kind of where I want to focus on. So how many parks I've activated. So 38, I want to get 2 more so I can get 40 and get my next award. And that's probably my main one there. Late shift, early shift, I haven't made a lot of contacts there. It'll tell you the states that you've activated in and the states that you've hunted and give some information there. So a lot of people try and make contact with parks in all 50 states. And there's a repeat offender award. So if you activate a park 20 times or a 6-pack award, 10 contacts at 6 different parks on 6 meters. I have not done very well there, but would like to try. And I'm having fun focusing on the Activator N1CC. Started that, really focusing on that this year. It's 10 parks on 10 different bands. Kind of a fun challenge, but with the bands improving and it affects or kind of changes what I bring for an antenna and how I approach that. But those are some of the different ways and things you can track yourself. Lastly, there's also a stats page here that'll show you your activated bands and places that you've hunted. It was kind of interesting to see that more than a third of my contacts have been VHF and UHF. I'll talk about in a minute why I don't recommend that for parks on the air, at least for people starting out, but I have done a lot of activations on VHF and UHF. All right, there's a list of your activations, and there's terminology that you hear like 3-fer and 2-fer. And that is really about not only going to one park to activate the park. The easiest example I can think of right now is the one I did the other day, is Fort Eby State Park is the main park that I went to. Fort Eby State Park is also within Eby's Landing National Reserve. And there's also a trail that goes through the park. So as long as you're within 100 feet of that, then you can also count that as activating the trail. Knowing trails, knowing reserves, other things are some of those things that are interesting. Also, someone reached out to me and they're like, how come you activated Eby's Landing Reserve when you were at Fort Casey? I said, well, it's because it's in the reserve. And I had to look up the website again and see these 3 state parks are located within the reserve. So a lot of research, some time on that, but helpful. There's also a hunter log. Don't look at this too much, but if folks want to look and see who you've chased or hunted, you can have a log there. And then we'll get to this in the end, but there's a major improvement over the last year where you can upload your own file. So that takes a lot of the stress and trying to email someone in the right format. But you can upload your own ADIF file. And as I was doing research for this and watching a video of Jason Johnston, one of the founders of Parks in the Air, he mentioned the manual log entry button. I hadn't even thought of that. So I was going through my pictures. I found, oh yeah, I activated that park back in 2020. And so I was able to manually enter stuff. It's very easy. So if you like to log on paper, you don't want to worry about an ADIF file or anything else, you can do a manual entry. It's going to work best if you probably don't have a lot of contacts, but that is a great option as well. Again, I'm not going to go through everything else, but there's a lot of information on the website, code of conduct, activator resources, all kinds of great stuff there. Let's go over the rules. Follow the law, DX code of conduct, be respectful, respectful of other people. Leave no trace is kind of a standard thing when we're going place. Follow the ranger's instructions. That was at Lake Snohomish State Park, where the park ranger drove up and they were sitting there for quite a while and they were chatting. And they weren't chatting with me, but there was 2 of us activating that park. And the other one was a park ranger off duty who was activating for Parks on the Air. So they were chatting there for a long time. The rangers were very nice. And they said, if you want to go to I don't think he said private area, but the area where they park their trucks and set up your antennas there, you can. Well, that was a good reminder from people that you cannot go to a private area. It needs to be a public area of a park. So even if the rangers offer you a spot to go, don't do it. Be courteous. I'll try and set up my stuff out of the way as best I can of people. This isn't the best picture, but I showed some headphones just so, depending on where we're at, being respectful of noise and other things and having headphones to limit noise for other folks. You got to make 10 contacts, and I'll say from a park in the designated list. So there are specific parks that count, not every park, but so make sure you look at the list. and then with a single UTC day. Again, when I was new to amateur radio, I'm like, what is Zulu time? What's UTC? What's all this kind of stuff? And so I did download an app on my phone called Ham Clock. I'm sure there's other stuff out there, but when I'm at a park or somewhere and I'm just not sure, with daylight savings, things are changing back and forth. So I always have on my phone a place that I can look up. I also have a watch that has dual time, so I can easily kind of push a button and switch back and forth. So, I mean, I've got a couple things, but knowing what UTC time. The other day, I was really trying to get, I think I got to 7 minutes before day rollover, and I finally made my 10th contact at a park. So there's times where you're like really trying to make sure you get it, and you don't want to start over and try and make 10 more. There's no specific exchange for POTA. You don't have to let people know you're at a park. You don't have to call CQ POTA. You can just do a contest. You don't have to say anything. So summits on the air you do, parks on the air you don't. QSO uniqueness is also based on the band and the mode. So this was interesting. So if you're doing FT8 and you switch to FT4, that's a different mode. And so that counts as a different contact, even if it's with the same person. So a lot of information on the website, again, about digital and what is, but that was interesting. And then all bands and modes available to the activator. I will always have a band plan saved on my phone, so I know, am I in the spot that I need to be? So I download that from the ARRL and have that on my phone as well. Can't make contact, or they won't count via repeater, but if you do it based on a satellite, you can do that. All activator and all equipment must be within the park's boundaries and on public property. This was at St. Edward State Park. It started to rain, so I jumped in there for a 10-meter contest. Inside the vehicle, you can do a picnic table. Kind of interesting. You can actually be flying an airplane, and if you are over a state park or a forest, and you know you're over the forest boundary, you can count that as a park on the air activation. So not many of us would probably do that, but I know that we got WA7NY that flies around, and he's probably activating parks and may not know it. POTA trail or river entities. I mentioned this earlier, but you must be within 100 feet of the entity edge. And so this is a little sign of the trail there at Fort Eby for Pacific Northwest Trail. And then we already talked about multiple locations, 2FERs, 3FERs, et cetera. You just got to make sure that you're within the boundary of all of those locations. For trails, I thought I'd show this resource real quick, is look up the trails that are in your state or your location. For us, Pacific Northwest Trail is one of those key things. And there's a map and it shows the trail going all the way through the North Cascades and along through a couple different parks and on its way down. So Joseph Whidbey State Park, it cuts through there. And I sat at a spot there and was able to actually activate within 100 park of the trail there. So there's different resources. Trails are a unique one that people often forget about. So what do you need? You need a radio. I'm going to say an HF radio, but you can make VHF, UHF contacts. One of the first things I did was buy a protective case, and I'll show that a little bit. I got a cheap one. But when I started, I didn't need that. I just threw my HF radio in my car seat, and I figured the padding and the cushioning was enough. I need some sort of antenna, some way to get your antenna in the air. So I've got a mast here. This is a self-standing antenna that we'll talk about in a bit. A battery, I hear there are parks that have power in some parts of the country. I don't know that I've ever seen it, but you might be able to plug in if you find a spot, but generally you're going to need a battery. And accessories, again, I mentioned power cables just to remind myself to bring that next time I go, but also adapters. I've had an N connection antenna to a VHF or UHF type connection, and I had to not activate the park. So remember to bring everything. You need to log somehow. So your laptop or paper or anything, just to make a log. And then having a park pass, directions, and those things are always good as well. A phone, I put a phone, you don't always have cell phone signal, but having resources on there to spot or look up band is always great. HF radio, any HF radio will work. There are a lot of different options out there, as you all know. I'm just showing right now the options that I have. The Elecraft KX2, it's a QRP radio, 10 watts. It was actually my first HF radio. most people, it probably doesn't make sense to get a QRP radio for your first radio, but I did use that for my first couple of park activations, and I still use that today. I like having 100 watts. So my ICOM 7300 is the main radio that I like to use. And then you can see at the bottom left, I got a cheap Harbor Freight 3800 case. And that was a cheap way to get it protected. What about VHF and UHF? Again, these are all photos, and I was using the elk log periodic antenna. That's what you see there. I've also got a roll-up J pole in one of those pictures from Mount Pilchuck. I'll generally use an HT. You can use a mobile VHF, UHF. It's obviously going to be about elevation. And so all of those activations you see there is also on a summit. There are spots you can drive to and do park activations. As long as you're getting elevation, that's going to help. I've seen people activate a park when it's a VHF contest or some sort of a contest going on to be successful. Batteries. Deep cycle. I would say use what you have. When I started out, all I had was a big old 55-pound deep cycle lead acid battery. And I hauled that a few times. It didn't last very long. But I either left it in my car and I had my radio in my car and the cables kind of with the battery in the back seat. Or there was a couple of times I hauled that thing up to a picnic table somewhere to try and make contact. So I did quickly go from a 55-pound deep cycle to a 4.3-pound BioNO 15 amp hour battery. The 20 amp hour is probably what most people use for parks on the air. And so I'd probably recommend that. At the time, there were shortages and all kinds of stuff going on. They called me and said, well, you ordered a 20, but would you like it if we send you two 15 amp hours? And I'm like, okay. So I have two 15, and I'm really glad I do. This little 15 amp hour battery will power me for hours at 100 watts. There's a lot of lower cost options now. I'm not recommending these necessarily, but Miotti I've seen mentioned, that's about 75, 80 bucks versus that 15 amp hour BioNO is about 150. I definitely like quality, and I've seen some things in amateur radio where having a good quality brand is important. And so that's why I like the BioNO, but I think folks have had good experience with Miotti. I did just buy a Redodo 50 amp hour LiFePO battery for about the same price of my 15 amp hour. And I bought that primarily for the summer if I'm going on long trips or activating a park or doing a long activation or contest, so that I've got a little bit more power. So somehow you got to get your antenna in the air. If you've got an HF setup in your vehicle, obviously that's great. I don't. But a lot of people will drive up, especially if it's hot weather or if it's cold weather or if it's raining. Having that as an option in your vehicle is great. Some folks will throw an antenna up in a tree. I have not done that, but that's always an option. And sometimes I'll mention here, it's important to be aware of the rules within the park. Sometimes you can't strap things to trees or put stakes in the grass. So recognize that rules might be different and respect those. Freestanding tripod, I'll talk about that in a minute. Example of Wolf River coils, but there's a whole lot of other options. And an extension mast or a telescopic fishing rod. And there are ham radio specific masts like the SOTA beams mast that I've got up there. But most of my masts that I've had are not. They're just, you look up eBay or Amazon for a fishing rod, a telescopic fishing rod. This is one that's no longer available, but bought this for about 15, 16 bucks years ago, and I got a couple of them. And this is one that I purchased recently that's a 7.2 meter mast for about 40 bucks. So there's a lot of lower cost options. Don't feel like you have to get a ham specific mast. There's a lot of stuff out there. All right. This is often what I do when I'm setting up is I kind of like what I did here. I will strap a mast anywhere. So I always have a bungee cord with me in my pack or whatever I'm doing. I usually have a couple of them, but the top picture on the left is the side of the shelter. That was me with a linked dipole that I had legs going out both sides, and I kind of found a way to strap the antenna mast to the shelter. A month or two ago, that's it. On the top right there, I just leaned that mast up against a tree and put the ends of the leg of the dipole over some shrubs and got out that way. At Kama Beach State Park on the left, multiple times I've just strapped it to a beach log. So I'm like, where do I want my antenna? Where do I want to sit? What can I strap it to? The dangerous drop-off sign, that was at Fort Casey. I just strapped it to the post and sat there. I've jammed it into rocks on a summit. I've leaned my pack up against it. I've just found a way to support it or bunging it. So there's all kinds of ways. I know there's a lot of people that guy it and do all kinds of stuff. I'm just kind of throw it up here. It'll probably work. Antennas, again, there are way too many options. So I figured today I would focus on the simple, low-cost ways and some of the simple things that I've done to get on the air. And so you don't feel like you've got to spend a lot of money. A dipole, speaker wire antenna. I was going back through my list, and I think my third activation was at Camino Island State Park, and I just bought my ICOM 7300. And of course, I used all my money to buy that. I didn't save anything for the antenna. And so I'm like, well, what can I do? So I found some speaker wire. I was watching this guy, and I'll talk that in a minute, but basically created a speaker wire antenna for a few bucks and made contacts and got on the air. Link dipole, I'll talk that in a minute as well. End-fed half wave, cut for a specific frequency. I really like those. I've used that mostly, but I'm trying to come up with other options that give you more band options now that bands are improving. A random wire is what I've got set up here with just some speaker wire antenna. I'll have to change out the antenna at some point, but that's what I first used. You can see 41 feet of wire coming from the top of the mast over here to a little box that I'll show in a minute. 41 feet of wire and 17 feet of counterpoise is often what I'll use, but a lot of times I don't use counterpoise. I'll just use the coaxial on the ground. And I've used other lengths of wire as well, or a vertical like what was shown here. Again, there are a lot of other options, loops and other things. So again, speaker wire dipole. I got into amateur radio when KG6HQD Jerry was on YouTube talking about summits on the air. Now a silent key, but really a great encouragement for someone like me just trying to get in the hobby. Yeah, he's still got a video out there. There's a lot of other ones, but if you want to learn about speaker wire antennas and how to make one, how to set them up, that's a great website to look. For the 10-meter contest, I didn't have a 10-meter antenna, so I had some speaker wire. I split it out to the right length. I used those little clips on the ends, used a binder clip to attach it to the top and a little strap, and had a really cheap antenna and made at least 50 contacts. Australia and Japan and Costa Rica and all kinds of places all over the world. So all those things along with a binding clip, and you're set up for a few bucks. A linked dipole is what I use a lot of times as well. So if I've got the space to spread that out, 80, 40, 30, 20 meters, if I don't want 80 meters, I just won't extend the whole thing out. You also get 15 meters in that case as well. So you use those little links to cut the electrical connection and shorten your antenna wire and choose the band you're on. So if you're switching bands, you're constantly kind of pulling the legs of the antenna and unclipping things, but linked dipole is a simple thing, and those are about $100. Although I'm not going to buy another one because I know Josh W7H, if you're watching, told me you should be able to make that on your own. It's simple, not spend more than a few bucks. I see someone shaking their head, so I will make my next one before I buy one. But if you're starting out and haven't done that, that's an option. Again, this was my first time using my 7300 at a park. And I leaned the mast up against a tree and I put the speaker wire out. My radio was in the front car seat, a deep cycle battery, I think, in the back seat, and made my 10 contacts from Camino Island State Park. 20-meter end-fed half wave. I'll use that a lot as well. So you can see this is at Bayview State Park. I think you've activated this one, Don. See, my mast is strapped to the fence post, and the pack antenna part of the antenna is on the table, and I'm using my KX2. And on that activation, I talked to someone in Argentina, which was pretty awesome. So again, a lot of times I'll have an antenna, I'll throw a mast up, just have one leg of the wire come into the table wherever I'm at and make contacts that way. A random wire antenna, again, I was looking for a cheap way to have multiple bands. And so again, not sponsored in any way. Nelson Antenna is one I found on eBay. I think I paid about $40 for a 9-to-1 unit and attached different lengths of wires to that. So 41 feet, I've used that. That's what I've got set up here. I've also used 84 feet. So when I first got it, this is at Fort Eby, and I showed up at the park with the 9-to-1 unit and a 100-foot roll of speaker wire. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I ended up splitting the speaker wire and have these two strands, cut it at 84 feet. And then you can see kind of here on the top of the mast, I strapped the box up there, and you can see the wire going at 84 feet out there somewhere. And then I took 84 feet for ground or counterpoise, and that's looks like it's going along through there. So again, I made 60 or more contacts just with a $40 box and some speaker wire spread out across there. Now, looking back at that, I'm kind of laughing because there's a trail that goes through there, and I really shouldn't have put that wire out there. And vertical antennas, I waited to buy a vertical. I felt like you're doing parks in the area, you have to have a vertical, right? Everyone has a Wolf River coil. And so I did buy one. I wanted to learn about verticals. There are times I like them. One of them was when I was on a summit and there was no room on the summit for an antenna. And so being able to throw that up with a QRP radio, I just threw the radios over the side of the cliff and made contacts on 40-meter quick, and it was great. It is a compromise. I mean, every antenna is going to be a compromise in some way. It's more complex if you're starting out. I bought a nano VNA so I could try and figure out the reading and figure that out, and that was complicated. I would love to get a rig expert or something like that so that I can, it's much easier and you're not having to try and figure out the menus every time when you're nano. But anyway, Wolf River coil, having a vertical or something simple is definitely an option. Logs have to be submitted. Again, the activator will do that. There's no time limits, but be courteous to folks that are trying to make contacts with you, so get out there. One log can cover multiple days. Logs must be in the ADF format, but again, I was finding when you do the manual entry, if you've got a paper log, all you do is you go to the website, you type in your contacts, the time of the contact, the park, and you plug it in, you submit. So you don't have to do any ADF or any logging format if that's new to you. And then, again, a lot of other information out there. Hammers is one of those tools. If you're looking at logging software, Hammers, it's free on the to download on the computer. I think it's a few bucks if you get it on your phone. It's one of the tools that a lot of folks use for Parks in the Air now. It's very easy. You click on the new logbook button, and there's a template for Parks on the Air. Then you go in, you create it, you type in their call sign, the basic information of your QSO, and when you're done, there's a little drop down to export the ADA file. You save it and you upload it to Parks in the Air, and you're good. So it's a very easy way to do it, and it's probably the best one to use if you're new. If you've got logging software you already use, use what you're familiar with. And going back here again, you can upload that ADA file or the manual log entry that I mentioned. And again, a lot of information about submitting your logs, Park on the Air information, everything. Definitely go back and look at the website. So thanks definitely for listening. Hopefully this was helpful and kind of giving you a quick overview of Parks on the Air, and encourage you to get out there. And then, yeah, questions, John? Of course, yeah, of course.
I did National Park on the Air, and then of course Parks on the Air came after that. You got to remember, the one thing you didn't mention was about Logbook of the World.
Yeah.
Because you actually want, if you're doing Logbook of the World, you'll have to be careful of where you're at. One of them is your county. Now, we're in Snohomish County, but Island County is where 7 parks, something like that. And Deception Pass, I did it. I do my Parks on the Air using my pickup with the antenna on the back of it. I don't get out and do all the stuff he does. But in fact, I did Deception Pass in the parking lot just as you cross the bridge. Worked very well. But you have to make sure where your county is and your grid is, because if you're doing logbook of the world, you have to have those to make, because somebody might be looking for, as you said at the very beginning, it's county hunters. County hunters are people who are trying to get 3,077 counties and parishes in the United States. We had two major county hunters. One of them was, I can't remember. Ed Impey was one of them. And I can't remember the second one, right? But he lives in Muckle Hill. Yes, thank you. KC7YE is the other one. And then I made the 500, and it was tough getting 500. But as you said, I went down to Lewis County and sat in the state park. If you're going to stay overnight, and some of us have, you need to talk to them ahead of time. And because where I wanted to park was not normal for a park entrance and for normal park going through the park. So I arranged that I could go on to an area that typically isn't, but it was on the park. And also had to pay fee for overnight. But also there was something else I was going to say, but you've done a lot more than I've ever done, but it's fun. Yeah. And typically during the pandemic, I was parking, since the parks were closed, I would park at the gate. I was on the park property, so that worked out. But there is a website that the county or the county hunters have developed, which lists probably 95% of the parks, state parks, and they give the county that those state parks are in so that you can be fairly accurate. Problem is some parks cover 2 or 3 or 4 different counties, so you have to be a little bit more careful. But it's important when you're logging of where you really are. And so, thank you. Anything?
No, thank you. That's really good. And one of the questions I've had for folks who do Logbook of the World is, I think your contacts with Logbook of the World within that specific instance that you're using are supposed to be within, I think, a 50-mile radius. Technically, I don't know if everyone follows that, but so sometimes you're outside of that radius and the park. So there are nuances there. I'm definitely not the expert research and do that. I'll leave that there. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, James. Is it possible for you to post on the site when you're going out? So maybe if someone wants to tag along and kind of observe in the wild, they can do that with you.
I would love to. Yeah. Trying to think through the best that, and maybe it's whether it's a club, something we organize on the event this summer, or just kind of when I'm going out. I know you've mentioned an interest, so happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Paige.
You mentioned the different types of facilities, I guess, parks, trails, reserves. What about preserves? Are there any preserves in that list? Are we as ham radio operators even allowed to transmit from preserves, wildlife preserves, natural preserves? That's something I've never really caught on to as being a rule of whether or not we can or cannot transmit from there. And again, are they in that list? Thank you.
Yeah, short answer is yes. I believe they are. I think there's Whatcom Wildlife Preserve or something like that is one of the parks up there. I think it's 8666 or something like that. There are probably some specific rules that I would defer to. The official rules or laws, but yeah, I believe there are preserves in the park list. Yeah, Paige.
Okay. Hey, great presentation. I just two things what John brought up. Logbook of the World, you can actually put multiple locations in your Logbook of the World client on your computer. So like I have an entry for every park I've been in with the specific grid square, county, all that. And one trivia notice, Deception Pass is in two different counties. There's actually part of Deception Pass State Park in Skagit County on our side of the bridge. I didn't know that until just a few weeks ago. But one thing that you didn't bring up, if you're new to Parks on the Air and you go out to a park and you don't get your 10 contacts, log it anyway, because the hunters still get credit. You may not get credit for the activation, but the hunters are going to be looking for their credit for your park, and you can always go back.
Great point.
And also, I've taken other hams out on activations. And so if you want to schedule something, hit me up too. And the club thing, a lot of clubs do that. A lot of clubs will have a Parks on the Air day.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, great info. And then there's also, I know we got a question back there too.
Before, let me just interrupt briefly. There are some radios out on a table out in the lobby. Those were donated to the club. If you need a radio, take it.
Wow. That's awesome.
You will, when you're looking, or if you were to Google Parks on the Air, you'll find that there's 3 different groups that are doing Parks on the Air. There's the Parks on the Air that he showed. There is another gentleman in United States that is doing a Parks on the Air, which kind of does the same thing, but he's in competition with the Parks on the Air. And then thirdly is Wild. What is that? WWNFF, Wild
Floral.
It's an international group. It's WWNFF. And it's a worldwide organization. Their website is overseas, so there's some time lag to do them, and it's just a little slower using it, but it is available. They have different rules than the United States group does. And so where Parks on the Air is 10 contacts, there's 44, I believe.
Wow.
And it seems an illogical number, but that's what it is. And you can do VHF, UHF, like Wallace Falls. I sat there because I have UHF, VHF in the truck. I've made a few contacts on both UHF and VHF because the local people around here want to get the local park also. So thank you.
That's good. Yeah, there are great local folks. And yeah, question on the right side. Yeah.
My question is, do you have to have both parties participating in a contest? Or say if I was just simply camping at a park without wanting to necessarily log myself in as an activator, would that be of any benefit to the other party, the hunter party?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage you to submit your log. So the person, you can get a park to park contact. If there were other people that chased you, they'll get the contact just from Parks on the Air. The only person that submits the log is the activator of the park. But if you're just having fun and making contacts and doing it, whatever, you definitely, yeah, have fun. You don't have to do Parks on the Air. Yeah. Is it Nate? Yeah.
Yeah. Question, on the website, is there a way to look up and filter on who might be is alerts or anything, or what parks around where someone might be activating VHF, UHF? So like, hey, I wanted to be a hunter, but I'm just on VHF, UHF. I wanted to see who's around who might be doing that. For
sure. There is on the spots page, you can filter it. And yeah, VHF, UHF is definitely a thing. I don't know as much about this, but I signed up for Ham Alert, or probably others might be better. That if you're doing a park, you can probably set up an alert. If it's a park in Washington, VHF, you know, whatever, it'll send you a text or do whatever, or send them. Yeah. So generally, I don't see a lot of folks, and please correct me if I'm wrong, spot necessarily for VHF, UHF local, but you know, having your radio on, and if you hear someone call for a park on the air, definitely responding is great. Yeah. Anything else?
From the booth?
Yes.
So power limitations, there's nothing that I've read, there's power limitations, but what about QRP? Is it real difficult to do that? Or where's the sweet spot with POTA?
You know, I've seen people, it's a contest. What is the least amount of power that it can do to activate a park? So there are no limitations and there's no limit on power. There have been times with my 10 watt on single sideband or voice that I've made 10 contacts really easily with basic antennas. And there's been times where it's just impossible. But I was at a park the other day where even with my 100 watt radio, the bands, I mean, I bring up the bands and there was nothing. And I switched antennas thinking, gosh, is it my antenna? And there was nothing there as well. So this is my first time on a solar cycle upswing. And so knowing that things can be really good, but I'm also seeming to find that things can be really dead as well. But so no limits. I think it's probably good to watch the bands maybe a little bit more. And potentially, like this picture is here. This is me playing with FT8 on the KX2, and it was my early setup I was playing with for summits on the air, but I used it for parks. But that took me a long time at that park to get 10 contacts on FT8 on that specific day. So no limits for power. I think folks will use the like the Yaesu 817 or 818, 5 watts and make contacts, or the 705 is similar around that range. Yeah. Good question. Anything else? I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you. Awesome.
Thank you, James. That's well done, sir. All right, everybody, drive safely, and we will see you at Field Day.